Like many of you who are here in this audience, I never came to the Andes with the idea of trying to do archaeology or do anything with anthropology. I came to climb in some of the higher peaks, but in the process, being an anthropologist who'd spent a number of years in Nepal, I was interested in what the people thought about their landscape, particularly obviously the mountains, and I found that it was just an overpowering importance in traditional Andean society. I worked with some of the so-called shamans, Pacos. These shamans had their powers directly related to the importance of the mountain deities that they could call, that they could communicate directly with. And these deities, it wasn't just that they owned the crops or that they owned the animals and so forth, it was that they also controlled the climate. And this has got a very sound ecological basis. After all, where does the water come from? They're famous for their stonework, and they're famous for their irrigation systems, agricultural development, and so forth. But what we didn't know until fairly recently, just in the last few decades, was just how important mountain worship was to the Incas. But what we were finding that there were a number of sites that have been built above 5,200 meters and extending up to 6,700 meters. So you have, in a very short length of period, the Incas climbing hundreds of peaks and actually building structures on them over an immense area, really an incredible feat. What set off interest in particular with high-altitude archaeology was a discovery in 1955, actually by looters of the famous El Plomo mummy. This is one of the best preserved mummies in the world. And what we were doing is we were trying to do serious, systematic archaeological excavations at high altitude. And to do that, you had to stay several days. Many of you are familiar with Volcan Copiapó. In this case, we were 10 days camped at over 6,000 meters. This was one of the statues we recovered. And this was the basis, in fact, for a lot of the interpretations of what Incan women wore. These statues have, in miniature, textiles that are so finely woven, it's finer than some of the best machine-made textiles that you can find today, using vicuña wool and so forth. But what had attracted me first was Licancabur. What particularly attracted me was you were getting a lake at over 5,900 meters on top of the mountain that had ruins. I thought this was really a unique subject to do a little bit more research into. I thought if there were Inca ruins around it, we knew from like the cenotes in Mexico and from other places that they would have perhaps made offerings into the lake. In 1982, it was carried up scuba gear to dive in that lake in the summit, and it still today remains a world record. As it turned out, we didn't find any offerings in the lake, but we did find new species of zooplankton, so we were able to at least get something out, even though we didn't have a clue that it existed in the first place. Now, in 1995, I went to Arequipa. After climbing so many volcanoes, I wanted to see one in eruption. To our amazement, when we got up, saw that for the first time in recorded memory, that the summit was snow-free. And down below, we found what then became famous as the Ice Maiden, or Juanita. When we tried to lift it, it's so heavy, we realized that it had to be frozen. Now this is critical. Here we were finding one of the few frozen mummies ever found. We're finding it relatively intact, and it looked to be, to me, female. There had never been one found like that before. I mean, we were able to, fortunately had a spare burrow, and were able to get the mummy back in time without it unfreezing and get it into a freezer where it still exists. And we're able to reconstruct the way this woman had dressed from the colors from the textiles that were removed. And you can see the beauty of this. I mean, this could be a fashion statement in New York. But we did, however, take her to the United States, to Johns Hopkins, to do a stereolithographic, CAT scan, and there determined the cause of death. For the first time, we knew the fracture, a skull fracture, a blow to the head, had been the reason that she had died. This was a human sacrifice. I'm often told how brutal it is. I'm not saying it's not brutal, but anyone who's been hit in the head and knocked unconscious knows that that's probably the best way to go, because you don't know you've been hit until you wake up. That created a considerable amount of publicity, and Subsequent to that, we're able to see interest expand exponentially in indigenous culture. Now, this is just for those of you not familiar with some of the altitudes when we give them. What does 6,700 meters mean? The climbers here, of course, know it, but you begin to realize how incredibly high that was. We think that it's a great feat to get up 6,700 meters. The Incas were doing this 400 years before Europeans even reached that altitude. So they were hoping to get the help of the mountain gods for them. Only the Inca emperor could okay this kind of sacrifice. It was considered an honor for the parents, even, for their child to be selected. And the children were selected because they're pure. And they're going to go live with the gods. In essence, they're going to be like ambassadors from the community. And so they are kind of deified in and of themselves. This is the boy that we excavated. You can see the fine preservation of the boy. And this is what it looked like when we started taking CAT scans. And the preservation was unique of the brain. Here you get the gray matter and so forth. But the gist of it is extremely well-preserved body. Nothing like this had ever been found before. It's 500 years old. And when they took DNA, when they took samples for DNA, they found out that it was exactly the same as a living person. It's not just the mummies, of course. We're finding these incredible artifacts. This is the best preserved Inca headdress that's ever been found. And it's as if it was new. I mean, it's hardly been touched. But probably the best preserved of all the mummies was the maiden. There's still a big question is how she can be so well preserved. You can't do it with cryogenics. You can't do it. You get desiccation, you get a number of other problems, skin cells, the cells breaking and so forth. This is exceptionally well preserved, and it'd be a long story as to why. With technology, she is never going to stop giving information that's new. We know what meals she ate 6 months, a year and a half before she was sacrificed. We can find out infectious diseases she had from the antibodies that are found in the blood. There's air in her lungs from 500 years ago. Looters are getting to these sites. There's virtually no way you can protect them. How do you protect a mountain, particularly if it's on a frontier like Yuyaco or Licancabur or whatever? Most of the sites were utterly destroyed, and that includes the religious sites. But it doesn't mean that a lot of the beliefs that were being held have been lost totally, but they're still alive through many traditional communities in Peru, Bolivia, and in northern Chile to a degree. But of course, these are actually the protectors of the cultural patrimony because at least, thank goodness, it's still hard to get up there and actually do the work. But that's going to change as climbers get better equipment to get more easy access and so on. So there is an urgency to doing more of this work. Thank you very much.